The cold came early that year. By the middle of November, the Bitterroot Range had already swallowed its first hard snow, and the passes that connected the high country to the valleys below had turned to ice so thick a man could chip at it for an hour and still not reach dirt. I had been living up there for 2 years. 2 winters alone in a cabin I built with my own hands from timber. I felled myself on a ridge so steep the wind never stopped moving, even on days when the sky was perfectly still. My name is Cormac Fenn. I was 39 years old, and I had not spoken more than 20 words to another human being in the past 4 months. That was the way I wanted it. I had come up to these mountains after the courts told me no for the last time, after the lawyers took what little money I had left and handed me back a stack of papers that meant nothing. After I stood in front of a judge in a room that smelled like pipe smoke and floor wax and listened to him explain in the careful, patient voice of a man who has never missed a meal why the land my father built his life on no longer belonged to anyone named Fenn. I had come up here because going down meant dealing with people. And people in my experience by then fell into 2 categories: the ones who had taken something from me and the ones who were about to. So I trapped and I hunted and I split wood and I kept my own counsel, and I told myself that was enough. On the morning I am going to tell you about, I had risen before the sun. That was normal for me. The darkness before dawn was the best time to check the trap lines. The animals moved at night and settled before light, and if you were quiet enough and moved the right way through the snow, you could cover 3 miles of ridge before breakfast and come back with enough meat to last the week. The temperature was somewhere below 0. I did not own a thermometer. I knew it was cold because the inside of my nose froze on the first breath outside, and the leather of my boots stiffened before I had made it 100 yards from the cabin door. I moved east first, following the ridge down toward the lower tree line where I kept 4 traps spaced out along a stream bed. The stream had frozen solid 2 weeks ago. I walked on it sometimes when the snowpack on the banks got too deep, listening to the hollow sound my boots made on the ice, a sound like walking on the lid of an empty box. I found the first trap empty. The second had a rabbit in it already stiff. I reset the trap, put the rabbit in the canvas sack on my back, and moved on. It was at the 3rd trap 3 miles from the cabin and maybe a mile and a half east of the mining settlement called Copperhead Flats that I saw the footprints. I stopped. They were not animal tracks. I had been reading animal tracks since I was 6 years old when my father first took me out into the Tennessee hill country and made me kneel in the mud and look. These were human footprints, small, made by a foot without proper boots, maybe without any boots at all. The impressions were shallow in some places and deep in others, which told me the person had been moving unevenly, favoring one side. The right foot dragged slightly. I could see where the toe had caught the surface of the snow instead of lifting clear of it. I looked up from the tracks and followed their direction with my eyes. They came from the southeast, from the direction of the settlement. They were heading roughly north toward nothing in particular, toward the deeper wilderness. I looked behind me. My own tracks were the only other marks on the snow. I stood there for perhaps 10 seconds. A man who has lived alone in the mountains long enough starts to think in practical terms about everything. Sentiment gets worn away by weather, and solitude the way water wears away stone. What I thought standing there over those footprints was not who is this or what happened. What I thought was that whoever made these tracks was in trouble. Bare feet in this temperature meant frostbite within the hour. The dragging gait meant exhaustion or injury. The direction away from town and into open country meant the person either did not know where they were going or did not care. Neither of those possibilities ended well. I followed the tracks. It took me perhaps 6 minutes. The trail curved around a stand of pine and dropped down a gentle slope to a small depression in the ground where the wind would not reach as strongly, the kind of natural hollow that animals sometimes used for shelter. She was lying there face down in the snow. I will not dress up what I saw, because there is no need to. She was a woman young, wearing a dress that had been fine once dark blue with some kind of stitching at the cuffs now torn and filthy and nowhere near adequate for the cold. Her hair was dark brown and frozen at the ends where it had gotten wet. Her hands were at her sides, palms down against the snow, and she was not moving. I knelt beside her and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck. A pulse, slow and weak, but there. I turned her over carefully. Her face was pale in a way that had nothing to do with cold alone. There was a bruise along her left cheekbone, yellowish at the edges, a few days old. Her lips were cracked. Her feet were wrapped in what looked like strips torn from a petticoat, soaked through and beginning to freeze solid around her toes. Her eyes were closed. Whatever had brought her out here in the middle of a Montana winter night, she had nothing left to fight it with. She had simply lain down in the snow and given up or given out, and the difference between those 2 things did not matter much at this temperature. I looked at her hands. The left hand had an old scar across the palm, a thin white line that had healed well. The right hand, the forefinger specifically, had a small callus on the inside of the first joint, the kind that comes from holding a pen for long hours over many years. A person who wrote. A person who had been educated. I do not know why I noticed that. I noticed everything. That was how I had survived 2 winters alone. You notice things, or you do not survive. I picked her up. She weighed less than she should have. I adjusted her across my shoulders the way I would carry a deer carcass. Her weight distributed so I could move without losing my balance, and I turned toward Copperhead Flats. The cabin was 4 hours away. The settlement was 40 minutes. She needed warmth, and she needed it soon, and whatever else could be said about Copperhead Flats, it had fires burning in it. I walked fast, keeping to the low ground where the wind was less severe. She made no sound the whole way. Her breathing was shallow and quick against the back of my neck, little white puffs of vapor that told me she was still with me, still somewhere on the right side of the line. The settlement came into view through the trees about 40 minutes after I found her. I could hear it before I saw it. That was always the way with Copperhead Flats. It was the kind of place that generated noise the way a wound generates heat, constantly and without real purpose. Men shouting, a dog barking, the distant clang of metal from the direction of the mine equipment sheds. And then underneath all of that, a voice I did not know, raised and carrying with the practiced projection of a man who had done this before, performing for a crowd. I stopped at the tree line. $5,000, the voice was saying. That is what the territory is offering for information leading to the capture of Nora Voss, formerly Nora Callum daughter, by adoption of the late Governor Ellsworth Callum. Brown hair, amber eyes, approximately 30 years of age. Wanted for the murder of the governor and for the attempted murder of her husband, one Harlan Voss, prominent landowner and former state senator. If anyone has seen this woman or has knowledge of her whereabouts. I looked down at the woman on my shoulders. Brown hair. I could not see her eyes from this angle, but I had noted the color when I turned her over. Amber. The brownish gold of creek water in late afternoon. I stood at the tree line and listened to the rest of what the man was saying. His name, I would learn later, was Felix Grubb. He was a drifter and a schemer who had washed up in Copperhead Flats 6 months before and made himself useful to various people in various ways, none of them particularly honorable. He was holding up a paper with a drawing on it, turning it so the crowd gathered in the frozen mud of the main street could see. I did not need to see the drawing. $5,000 was more money than most men in that crowd would see in a decade of work. It was enough money to buy land, to buy equipment, to buy a different life entirely. And Felix Grubb was offering it to anyone who could produce the woman. I looked at her again, at the torn dress and the frozen feet and the bruise on her cheekbone that was several days old, at the hands that told me she was educated and that she had been through something hard before she ended up face down in the snow on a hillside 3 miles from anywhere. $5,000. I thought about Clara. Then I stopped thinking about Clara because I had taught myself not to, and I turned away from the settlement and walked back into the trees. I went around Copperhead Flats in a wide arc, staying in the timber, moving carefully so that no one at the edge of the crowd would see me. It added 20 minutes to the journey. I bought the supplies I needed, salt and flour and 2 boxes of ammunition from a trader who operated out of a storage building on the north end of the settlement, paid cash. Said nothing about what I was carrying. The trader did not ask. In places like Copperhead Flats, people learned quickly that asking questions about what other men were carrying was a good way to find yourself on the wrong end of a very short conversation. Then I went up the mountain. The woman woke up somewhere on the second hour of the climb when the trail steepened, and I had to adjust her weight, and she came part way back to consciousness from the jostling. She did not speak. She made a small sound, sharp and frightened, and went rigid against me. "You are all right," I said. "I am taking you somewhere warm." She did not respond to that, but after a moment she stopped being rigid and went limp again, and I kept climbing. She was fully conscious by the time I reached the cabin, though barely. I set her down in the chair closest to the dead fireplace and went to work building the fire. Pine kindling, then larger splits, working fast but not careless. The fire caught inside 2 minutes. I added more wood and turned back to her. She was watching me. Her eyes were open and fixed on me with an expression that was not quite fear and not quite something else. It was the look of a person who has been through enough that they have used up their fear, and now they are simply watching, simply calculating, simply trying to understand what the next threat is going to be and where it is going to come from. I had seen that look before. I had worn it before. "You need to get the feeling back in your feet," I said. "Take those wrappings off. Get them close to the fire, but not too close." She looked at her feet. Then she looked at me. "I can do it myself," she said. Her voice was low and careful, the voice of someone who is measuring every word before they release it. There was no accent I could easily place, which usually meant a person had lived in enough different places that no single one had stuck. "All right," I said. I went to the small room in the back where I slept and got a blanket and brought it out and laid it over the back of the chair near her without touching her and without saying anything about it. Then I went to the stove and started water heating for something hot to drink and got the dried meat and the last of the cornmeal from the shelf to start something more substantial. I did not look at her while I worked, but I was aware of her the whole time, the way you are aware of a deer that has stepped into the edge of your field of vision. Any sudden movement and it is gone, or it charges and you do not know which. She got the wrappings off her feet herself. She did not make a sound doing it, but I could see from the corner of my eye that at least 2 of her toes on the right foot were badly frostbitten, white and hard. She held her feet toward the fire and sat very still. I set a mug of hot water with some dried herbs I kept for this purpose in front of her and went back to the stove. We were quiet for a long time. The fire built itself up and the cabin began to warm and the wind outside moved around the walls the way it always did in winter, testing for weaknesses, finding none. "Where am I?" she asked. "About 4 hours from Copperhead Flats, higher up, my cabin." "You live here alone?" "Yes." She was quiet again. Then, "I heard them, in the settlement, talking about me." I did not say anything. "You heard them too," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." "And you still brought me here." "You were dying," I said. "I do not leave things to die in the snow if I can help it." She considered that. "I am not a thing." "No," I agreed. "You are not." She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked into it. "My name is Nora Callum," she said. "My married name is Voss, but I do not use it. My father by adoption was Governor Ellsworth Callum of Montana Territory." I kept my back to her and kept working at the stove. "My husband is Harlan Voss," she said. I set down the wooden spoon I was holding. I set it down carefully, the way you set something down when you need a moment and you do not want your hands to do something your head has not authorized. "He had my father killed," she said. "He arranged it and then put the blame on me. I have been running for 11 days. I turned around. She was looking at me steadily. There were no tears. There was no performance in it. She said it the way you state a fact about the weather or the terrain. Here is what happened. Here is where things stand. I crossed to the shelf on the wall beside the fireplace. There was a small wooden box on it, the kind you can buy at any dry goods store for a few cents, plain pine with a fitted lid. I took it down. I opened it and removed the paper inside a document that had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had worn soft, and I laid it on the small table between us. She looked at it. It was a contract. The paper was dated 1868. At the top it read, in the formal language of legal documents of the era, Articles of Partnership for the purpose of mining operations at Stone Creek, Montana Territory. 3 signatures at the bottom. Harlan Voss, Ellsworth Callum, Thomas Fenn. She read it. She read it slowly and carefully, which told me she was taking it in, not just looking at it. Thomas Fenn, she said. My father. She looked up. In 1869, I said, your husband and your father altered the partnership records, removed my father's name. The land and the operation and every dollar that came out of Stone Creek went to 2 men instead of 3. My father had no legal recourse left to him. We lost everything. Our home, our land. The following winter was hard and we had nothing to shelter in. I stopped. My wife's name was Clara, I said. She did not survive that winter. Nora Callum sat very still. The fire crackled beside her. The wind moved outside. She looked at the document on the table. She looked at it for a long time. I did not know, she said. I know you did not, I said. How do you know that? Because you are here running from the man instead of living comfortably on what he took, I said. That is how I know. She was quiet. Then slowly she set the mug down on the table beside the contract. She straightened her back in the chair the way a person does when they are deciding something. Then we have both lost something to the same man, she said. Yes. And you still brought me here, knowing who I was. I picked up the document and folded it back along its worn creases and put it back in the box and put the box back on the shelf. I told you, I said, I do not leave things to die in the snow. She looked at the box on the shelf for a moment. Then she looked at me. What happens now? She said. Tonight you sleep, I said. Tomorrow we figure out the rest. She was still asleep when I went out the next morning. I rose before the light, as I always did, and dressed in the dark, and took my rifle from its place beside the door, and went outside without making noise. The cold was less punishing than the day before. The sky was clear and full of stars, the kind of sky you only get at high elevation in the deep cold, where the air is too thin and too frozen to hold any haze. I checked the trap line, reset 2 traps, came back with another rabbit and a grouse that had gotten its foot caught. By the time I pushed open the cabin door, the sky had gone from black to gray, and inside I could see that Nora Callum was awake and moving. She had found the cornmeal and the dried strips of venison, and she had started a pot on the stove. She was standing at the stove stirring when I came in, wearing the blanket I had left on the chair wrapped around her shoulders like a coat, her back to me, her hair loose and still not entirely dry from the day before. I set the rabbit and the grouse on the work table without saying anything. She did not startle. She had heard me coming, or she had not been startled by sudden sounds or movements for a long time. I hope this is all right, she said, nodding toward the pot. I was not sure of your proportions. It is fine, I said. I began cleaning the grouse. She finished at the stove and set 2 plates on the table without being asked and sat down. I washed my hands and sat across from her, and we ate. She ate the way someone eats when they have been hungry for a long time and are trying not to show it. Controlled, measured bites, but she finished everything on the plate in less time than she would have liked, I thought, and did not look at mine. How are the feet? I asked. Better than yesterday. The toes on the right side are still numb. It may take a few days. Stay off them as much as you can today. She nodded. We were quiet again. The stove ticked. Outside, the light was coming up slowly, gray, turning to pale gold along the tops of the peaks to the east. I had been turning something over in my mind since I came inside. An equation I did not like the result of, but one I could not make come out differently no matter how I arranged the numbers. They will come up here, I said. She did not look surprised. Harlan's men. Or anyone else who wants the money badly enough. Copperhead Flats is not a large settlement. Someone saw me buy supplies yesterday, someone always does, and someone will put that together with the woman they were told to look for. Maybe today. Maybe in 2 days. Not longer. She looked at her hands resting on the table. Then I should leave. In those feet you will not make it to the tree line. Then what do you suggest? I looked at her. She looked back. There was that steadiness again, that quality I had noticed the night before, the quality of a person who had run out of room for anything but the essential thing. "I know a way over the Blackthorn Pass that does not follow any existing trail," I said. "It is longer and harder, but it does not appear on any map I have seen, which means it does not appear in any search pattern someone from the settlements would use. On the other side of the pass, 2 days of travel, there is a town called Millstone. I do not know it. Most people do not. That is the point. My cousin is the deputy there, August Fenn. He is a man who takes the law seriously, which is either a problem or an asset, depending on what we bring him when we arrive." She considered that. "What would we need to bring him?" "Something worth more than a warrant," I said. "Something that makes it in his interest to listen before he acts." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I may have something. It depends on whether a woman named Agnes Dover made it out of the capital when I did. She was my father's housekeeper for 20 years. She was there the night he died." She paused. "She saw things that I did not see, things that I only understood later after it was too late to use them. Can you reach her? If she went where I think she went, if she had time, yes. Possibly." She looked at her feet, then back up. "I need you to understand something. Before we go any further, before you help me any more than you already have." "Say it." "The night my father died, I was in the room. I was present when he drank what killed him. Harlan's lawyers have constructed a picture from that fact. You should understand what you are walking into before you walk further into it." I looked at her for a moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" I said. "Because if you are going to help me, you should know the hardest part first, not the easiest part. Clara," she said, using the name carefully, "taught you that." I had not told her about the conversation I had the night before, only in my own head, the one where I thought about what Clara would do in this situation. I had not said a word about it. "I mentioned her name once," I said, "last night." "You did," she said. "But the way a person says a name tells you things about them. The way you said hers told me she was someone who valued honesty the way other people value gold." I looked at the table. Then I looked at the shelf where the pine box sat. On the shelf beside the box was the only other object in the cabin that had not been put there for purely practical reasons. A pair of small green gloves. Woman's gloves, the kind made from soft leather neatly folded together. Clara had owned 3 pairs of gloves. These were the ones she had with her the last time I saw her well. I had kept them because throwing them away had never been something my hands were willing to do. I had not told Nora Callum about the gloves. She had not asked. "We leave tonight," I said. "Not tomorrow. Tonight after dark. The cold will be harder, but the dark covers the tracks until the morning wind can work on them. By the time anyone traces where I went for supplies yesterday, we will already be on the other side of the first ridge." She nodded. "We will need to move light," I said. "1 pack, only what is necessary." "I have nothing to bring," she said. I left with what I was wearing. I stood and began organizing the pack. I moved methodically around the small space, taking what we would need and leaving what we would not. 2 days of food, the medical kit, rope, the rifle and ammunition, the small hatchet for fire building on the trail. I crossed to the shelf to take down the compass that I kept there. I stopped in front of the green gloves. It was a brief stop. I was not performing it. It was simply a moment where my body paused before my head told it to move on. I picked up the compass, turned toward the pack. From the corner of my eye I saw Nora Callum look at the gloves and then look away deliberately, the way a person looks away from something that is not theirs to look at. I put the compass in the pack. Then, without planning to, I reached back and picked up the gloves and slid them into the inside pocket of my coat, the one closest to the chest. Not in the pack, not where they would be jostled around with rope and ammunition and dried meat. The inside pocket. I did not explain this. She did not ask. The afternoon was long and quiet. I showed her what she needed to know for the journey. How to move on snow so the compression of your footfall is even and does not leave a deep print. How to read the sky in the northwest for the kind of storm that builds fast and comes down without warning. How to listen not with the front of the ear, but with the back of the skull, the way sound registers when you stop trying to hear it and just let it come to you. She learned quickly, better than quickly. She asked the right questions, the how questions instead of the why questions, which told me she was someone who operated on practical information rather than needing to understand the theory first. And then, in the late afternoon, while I was at the far end of the clearing, splitting the last of the wood that needed splitting before we left, she came to the door of the cabin. "There are horses," she said. "To the south. I would estimate 1/2 mile." I set the axe down. I listened. The wind was moving from the north, which meant sounds from the south were coming against it. I could hear nothing. "You are certain?" "My father raised me to identify horses by sound from the time I was small," she said. "He said it was the most important skill for anyone living near the frontier. More than one animal. Moving carefully, not at a trot. The kind of movement that means the riders are watching the ground." I went inside and got the field glass and climbed to the ridge above the cabin. It took me 3 minutes. 3 horses. Stopped at a vantage point that gave a clear view of the cabin and the surrounding clearing. They were standing motionless, the riders looking down, and one of them was holding something up a piece of paper, comparing it to what he saw below. They stayed for 5 minutes. Then they turned and went back down the slope the way they had come. They had not seen me on the ridge. I had been careful. I came back down. "They were confirming the location," I said. "They are not certain yet. They will go back to the settlement and report what they found, and then they will return with more men." "How long?" I thought about the ride back to Copperhead Flats, the conversation, the organization, the ride back up. If they push through the night, they could be at the cabin by first light. If they rest, mid-morning. "Then we go now," she said. "Not tonight. Now." I looked at the sky. 3 hours of light left, maybe a little more. "Yes," I said. We moved quickly and without wasted motion. She tied her hair back and put on the second coat I had, which was too large for her, but better than what she had come in. She laced the spare boots I had found in the back room, mine, but stuffed with cloth to make them fit without complaint, without comment. I banked the fire so it would smolder rather than burn, giving the impression of a recently occupied cabin to anyone who approached. I shouldered the pack. She was standing by the door, ready. The green was already fading out of the western sky. I looked around the cabin once, the way you look at a place when you do not know if you are coming back to it. Then I looked at her. She was looking at the pine box on the shelf. Not with greed. Not with sentimentality. With the kind of recognition you have when you see something that belongs to a story you have only heard part of. I took the pine box down and put it in the pack. The contract inside it had started all of this. It needed to go where we were going. I opened the door. The cold came in, and the last of the daylight came in with it, thin and pale and slanting down through the pines at a low angle. We walked out into it together, and I pulled the door shut behind us, and we moved into the trees, away from the trail, away from the settlement, away from the 3 sets of hoof prints in the snow below the ridge. The mountain was quiet around us. My footprints broke the surface of the snow with a sound like paper tearing, small and steady. Hers came behind, lighter but consistent. I did not look back. There are places a man carries with him not because they are his anymore, but because leaving them behind in the physical sense does not accomplish the thing he hoped it would. I had learned that over 2 years of trying. The mountain had not cured me of anything. It had only given me enough quiet to hear what was already true. What was true was that I was walking away from a dead fire in an empty cabin with a woman whose husband had helped destroy my family, and I was carrying in my chest pocket a pair of green gloves that belonged to someone who was not coming back, and in my pack a document that might finally mean something to someone who had the authority to act on it. What was also true was that for the first time in 2 years I was walking towards something instead of away from it. I did not know yet what to make of that. The trees closed around us, and the last of the light fell out of the sky to the west, and we kept moving north toward the pass, toward Millstone, toward whatever was waiting on the other side of the mountain. Nora Callum walked behind me and did not ask how far it was or how long it would take. She simply walked steady and quiet into the gathering dark. The Blackthorn Pass did not forgive mistakes. I had crossed it 4 times in 2 years, always alone, always in conditions that most men would have considered reason enough to turn back. The trail, if you could call it that, was less a path than a memory of one, a sequence of landmarks that existed only in the knowledge of people who had learned them from other people who had learned them before that. There were no blazes cut into the trees. There were no cairns of stacked stone. There was only the particular angle of a rock face at the first bend, the sound of a specific creek crossing where the water ran shallow over a shelf of granite even in the deepest freeze, and the way the ridgeline above looked against the sky at the point where you needed to leave the timber and cross open ground. I had memorized all of it. That was the only map that mattered. We traveled in silence for the first 3 hours. The cold was serious but not dangerous as long as we kept moving, and we kept moving. Nora Callum matched my pace without complaint and without asking me to slow down. I adjusted anyway slightly, not because I doubted her, but because I had 2 days of distance to cover, and burning everything in the first night was a poor strategy. She moved well in the dark. Better than I expected. She watched her footing, kept her weight low on the steep sections, used the trees for balance rather than grabbing at them, which would have slowed her down and left marks. On the one section where the trail dropped sharply and the snow had crusted into a slick sheet of ice over the underlying rock, she went down on one knee, caught herself, and was back on her feet before I had fully registered that she had slipped. She did not say anything about it. I did not say anything about it. Around midnight, by my estimation, we reached the abandoned station. It had been a forest ranger outpost once in the years when the territory had made a serious attempt to manage the timber in the high country before concluding that the high country would manage itself on its own terms, regardless of what anyone did about it. The building was small, one room with a sleeping loft that had partially collapsed on one side. The roof was intact on the south end, which was what mattered. The door had warped badly in its frame and required a shoulder to open, but it opened. Inside, the cold was only marginally less severe than outside. There was a small iron stove in the corner, a design I recognized as functional, and a stack of wood that someone at some point in the past year or two had left cut and split and piled against the interior wall. Dry enough. I built a fire small enough to provide heat without the kind of smoke that would be visible from a distance. The light was sealed inside by the shuttered windows and the warped door. Within 20 minutes, the south end of the station was approaching something a person could call warm without lying. Nora Callum sat on an overturned crate and held her hands toward the stove and looked at the floor. I found a collection of tools and equipment in the corner near the collapsed loft, old and dusty but organized. Someone had cared about this place once. Among the items was a small wooden kit box, the kind a field medic or a careful outdoorsman might carry. I brought it to the light of the stove and opened it. It had been left behind for a reason. Not everything in it was still useful. But there were bandages dry and still sealed, a small bottle of carbolic solution nearly full, a folding knife sharper than any tool that size had a right to be, needle and thread. I carried it to the crate where Nora was sitting and set it down beside her without comment. She looked at it. Then she looked at me. "I noticed you had nothing," I said. She opened the kit and examined its contents with the practiced eye of someone who had done this before, assessing usefulness, understanding composition, working quickly. She reorganized the contents and closed the box and set it on the crate next to her. "There is enough here to manage a moderate wound," she said. "Infection, minor fractures, lacerations. Not enough for anything serious, but better than nothing." "I know. I studied medicine in Philadelphia," she said, 2 years before I came back to the territory. You did not finish. My father's health declined. There was no one else." She looked at the stove. "I have thought many times about what I would have done differently. Gone back after he stabilized, completed the degree. But the years have a way of filling up with the thing that is directly in front of you, and by the time I looked up it was too late for a different arrangement." I did not respond to that. There was nothing to say about it that she had not already said better. I sat down on the floor across from her, back against the wall, rifle across my knees. The fire popped. Outside, the wind was picking up along the ridge the sound it made when it had nothing in its way for the next several miles. She had not asked me where we were going when we left the cabin. She had not asked how long the journey would take. She had followed because there was no better option available to her, and she had understood that without being told. But there were things she had not told me. I knew that the same way you know when a stream is running deeper than its surface suggests. "Tell me about Harlan Voss," I said. She looked up from the fire. "What do you want to know?" "How a man who did what he did to my family in 1869 was still operating freely in 1874. Because he is very good at arranging things so that other people are responsible for them," she said. The partnership documents were altered by a lawyer named Cresswell, who died 2 years later of a heart condition that was almost certainly not a heart condition. The land transfer was administered by a county clerk who moved to California with a sum of money that would not have been available to him on a county clerk's salary. Every step of it was insulated. Every person who touched it had a reason to stay quiet or was removed before they could become inconvenient. "And your father, the governor." Her voice did not change. That steadiness I had noted the first night, the quality of someone who has processed a thing so many times it has been worn smooth. My father refused to sign a land transfer agreement that would have given Harlan access to 3,000 additional acres of territory that bordered tribal land. Harlan had been working on that acquisition for 2 years. My father's refusal was the one obstacle he could not route around because my father was the one man in the territory whose authority in the matter was final and who Harlan could not buy. She looked at the fire. So he removed the obstacle. The night of the dinner. There was a formal dinner at the governor's residence, quarterly for the territorial legislature and the prominent landowners. Harlan was there. He always attended. He brought the wine himself that evening, which was not unusual. He was known for bringing wine from his own cellar as a gesture of hospitality. He handed me the decanter after dinner and asked me to pour for my father, as I often did. I poured. My father drank. She stopped. "You said Agnes Dover was there," I said. "She was serving. She had been with my father since before I came to live with him. She knew every room in that house the way most people know the backs of their own hands." She paused. "After my father fell and the room became chaos, I saw Agnes. She was standing at the side of the room near the service door. She was looking at Harlan, not at my father, at Harlan. She saw something. I believe she saw him put something into the decanter before he handed it to me. But in the confusion of the evening and then in the days that followed, when Harlan's version of events began to take shape in the official record, there was no space for what Agnes had seen. And Agnes, she said, is a woman of 60 years who has lived her entire life understanding exactly how much weight her word carries in a room full of men with legal authority. "Not enough," I said. "Not in the ordinary course of things," she agreed, "which is why I need something more than her word alone." I thought about that. "You said you thought you knew where she had gone." "There is a town called Harker's Crossing about 40 miles east of the capital. Agnes has a sister there. If she had time to get out before Harlan's people thought to look for her, that is where she would have gone." She looked at me. "The question is whether she got out in time. And the question after that is whether if she did get out, she is still willing to stand up and say what she saw." "You doubt that?" "I doubt nothing about Agnes Dover's courage," she said quietly. "I doubt the world's willingness to make room for it." We were quiet for a moment. The fire was settling into its steady phase, the initial burst of combustion giving way to the even, sustained heat that would last through the rest of the night if I managed it correctly. I added one piece of wood, not more. "The contract," she said. "The one your father signed. You have carried it for how long?" "Since he died. 18 months after we lost the land." "You intended to do something with it." "I intended to find someone with the authority to look at it and the willingness to do something about what they found. In 5 years I did not locate anyone who was both." "August Fenn," she said. "Your cousin. He is an honest man. I have not always agreed with his methods, but his honesty I have never doubted. Then he may be what we need." "If we bring him enough to work with," I said. A contract that is 5 years old with no witness and no corroborating evidence is a piece of paper. A piece of paper plus a witness plus physical evidence is a different thing entirely. She nodded slowly. She understood. "Then we need Agnes," she said. "We need Agnes." She looked at the fire for another long moment. Then she did something I had not expected. She straightened her back and turned to face me directly, and when she spoke her voice carried the particular weight of a person who is about to say the thing they have been building toward and who is not going to soften it. "There is one more thing you need to know," she said, "before we go any further, before Millstone and August Fenn and whatever comes after." I waited. The night my father died, I was holding the decanter. I poured the glass. My father drank from it. She held my eyes without blinking. I did not know what was in it. I have sworn that to myself, and I believe it completely. But I was the instrument of it, however unwilling. A jury, looking at the facts as Harlan has arranged them, will see a woman who had motive, who had access, and who was holding the vessel in her hands at the moment of death. "You are telling me you cannot win this cleanly," I said. "I am telling you that the evidence against me as Harlan has constructed it is not invented from nothing. It is built from real facts, arranged to point in a false direction. Dismantling it requires more than my word. Which is why you need Agnes, and the physical evidence Agnes can speak to." "Yes." "And if Agnes did not make it out?" She was quiet for a moment. "Then I am a woman who murdered her father and fled justice and led an innocent man into serious legal difficulty." She said it without self-pity. It was simply the calculation laid out. "Which is why I am telling you now in this station before we go further. You should understand what you are walking into. Not the easy version of it. The real version." I looked at her. In the 5 years since I had lost Clara and the land and everything that had been built on both, I had become out of necessity a good reader of people. Not of their words which anyone can manage, but of the space between their words, the thing that lives in the pause before a sentence and the set of the shoulders during it. What I read in Nora Callum sitting across from me in a cold, abandoned outpost on the side of a Montana mountain was not innocence performing itself for an audience. It was something harder to manufacture. It was a person who had decided that the truth, all of it, was the only thing worth offering even when the truth was dangerous. Clara had been like that. The thought came and I did not push it away as I usually did. I let it be there for a moment. Clara used to say, "I said, and then I stopped, and then I continued, that the hardest truths were the only ones worth saying, that the easy ones took care of themselves." Nora Callum looked at me. She did not respond immediately. She let the words sit in the air between us the way a person lets something fragile rest before deciding where to put it. "She sounds like someone who understood how things actually work," she said finally. She did. We were quiet again. Outside the wind worked along the eaves of the station. The fire held steady. I thought about the green gloves in my inside pocket. I did not reach for them. I was simply aware of them. "Sleep," I said. "We move again before light. The second day of the pass is harder than the first, and I want to be off the open ridge before the afternoon wind comes up." She looked at the collapsed loft, and then at the floor near the stove. "The floor is warmer," I said. "I will keep the fire." She took the blanket from the pack and lay down near the stove, her back to the wall, facing the room, not facing away. A person who sleeps facing the room is a person who has learned to keep watch even while resting. I settled back against the opposite wall with the rifle. The fire ticked and settled. I did not sleep. I did not try to. We came down out of the Blackthorn Pass on the afternoon of the second day, and Millstone appeared below us in the valley like something remembered rather than seen for the first time. It was not a large town. 200 people perhaps in the main settlement with the surrounding ranches and claims, bringing the total of the immediate area to perhaps twice that. A main street of packed dirt frozen solid this time of year. A church with a white steeple that was slightly crooked as if the builder had run out of patience near the end. A general store, a feed store, a small hotel, a building that served as both the doctor's office and the office of the deputy sheriff and perhaps 15 other structures of varying degrees of ambition. I had not been here in 8 months. It looked the same. We came in from the north end, which brought us past the feed store and the livery before we reached the main intersection. Nora walked beside me now rather than behind. The terrain was level, and the concealment concerns that had governed the mountain journey no longer applied in the same way. I pushed open the door of the deputy's office. August Fenn was sitting at his desk writing something in a ledger. He was younger than me by 5 years, which put him at 34. But he had the look of a man who had aged deliberately, who had chosen at some point to take on weight of a certain kind because the job required it. He was lean and sharp-faced, with careful eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses that he wore reluctantly and only when working with documents. He looked up. He looked at me. He looked at Nora. He looked back at me. "Cormac," he said. "August." He closed the ledger. He set down his pen. He took off the glasses and folded them into his breast pocket. All of this he did slowly and carefully, the way a man does things when he needs a moment to think before he speaks. "Sit down," he said. "Both of you." We sat. August looked at Nora for a long moment, and I could see him working through what he knew: the description on the warrant, the reward amount, the charges. He was not a man who could be rushed through that process, and there was no point in trying. "I know who you are," he said to her. "I expected you would," she said. "The warrant came through here 4 days ago. I have it in that drawer." He indicated the desk drawer to his right without looking at it. $5,000 is a significant sum." "It is," she agreed. "I am not going to pretend it means nothing to me," August said. "I have been honest about money my entire life. $5,000 would solve several problems I currently have." He looked at me. "Cormac, what are you doing?" "Listening to a situation that deserves to be heard," I said. "She is wanted for murder. She is wanted for a murder that Harlan Voss committed and arranged to have attributed to her," I said, "which is not the same thing." August was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is a serious claim." "I have a serious document," I said. I reached into the pack and took out the pine box and set it on his desk and opened it. He looked at the contract. He picked it up. He read it with the careful attention he gave everything in written form. "Thomas Fenn," he said quietly. "My father. I remember your father, Cormac. I was 20 years old when this happened. I remember what it did to your family." He set the document down. He looked at me. "This is 5 years old. In the absence of corroboration, it is a piece of paper." "I know that. Do you have corroboration?" This was the moment. I looked at Nora. She took it. "There is a woman named Agnes Dover," she said to August, leaning forward slightly, her voice clear and direct. "She was my father's housekeeper for 20 years. She was present at the dinner the night my father died. She was standing near the service entrance when Harlan Voss prepared the decanter of wine before handing it to me to pour. She saw what he put into it." August looked at her. "Where is this woman now?" "I believe she is in Harker's Crossing. If she was able to get out before Harlan's people thought to look for her." "You believe," August said. "I cannot be certain. But Agnes Dover is not a woman who frightens easily, and she is not a woman who fails to prepare for the contingencies she can foresee." August sat back. He put both hands flat on the desk and looked at them. "A witness's testimony alone in the current legal climate of this territory carries weight proportional to the standing of the witness," he said carefully. "I am not saying that is right. I am saying it is the reality we are working within." "I know what you are saying," Nora said. "Agnes Dover is a woman of color in Montana Territory in 1874. Her word against Harlan Voss in a territorial court with his money and his legal representation—" "I know," Nora said, "which is why her word alone is not what I am proposing to bring." August looked at her. "What else is there?" Before she could answer, the door of the office opened. We all turned. The man in the doorway was perhaps 45 broad across the shoulders, with the kind of stillness about him that comes from professional training in the management of dangerous situations. He wore a heavy coat with no identifying markings and a hat pulled down against the cold. He was not carrying a visible weapon, which in my experience meant nothing. He looked at Nora. He looked at me. He raised both hands slowly away from his sides, palms out. "I am not here for Harlan Voss," he said. "I am here because Agnes Dover asked me to find Mrs. Voss. She said if anyone knew where Mrs. Voss had gone, it would be someone in this direction." The room was very still. "Who are you?" August said. His hand had moved toward the pistol on his hip without completing the journey, resting on the edge of the desk instead. "My name is Dolan Marsh," the man said. "I was employed by Harlan Voss for 4 years as an investigator. I am not currently in that employment." He looked at Nora. "Agnes Dover is in Harker's Crossing. She is safe. She sent me ahead because she is traveling on foot and it is slow going. She will be in Millstone by tomorrow morning if the weather holds." Nobody said anything. Then Nora said very quietly, "Agnes is coming here." "She is." Dolan Marsh lowered his hands slowly. "She has something with her. A bottle. She has been carrying it since the night of the governor's dinner. She says she knows what is in it, and she says she knows who can prove what is in it." I looked at Nora. She was looking at Dolan Marsh with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not quite surprise. Something closer to the feeling you have when a door you had given up on opens. "Why are you doing this?" August said to Dolan Marsh. "You worked for Voss." Dolan Marsh was quiet for a moment. He looked at the floor, then at the wall, then at August. "I have a son," he said. "He is getting married in the spring. He wrote me a letter asking whether I would attend." A pause. I have been asking myself what kind of father attends that wedding, and what kind of father cannot. August looked at him for a long moment. "Sit down," he said. Dolan Marsh sat down. And then the door opened again. Felix Grubb stood in the opening, smaller than I remembered him from the sounds of his voice in Copperhead Flats, a narrow-shouldered man in his middle 40s, with the watchful eyes of someone who had survived by paying attention to every exit in every room he entered. He looked at the assembled group with an expression of a man who has walked into something larger than he expected and is rapidly recalculating. He looked at Nora. "I heard you were in town," he said to her. "I have been following this situation from Copperhead Flats." He reached into his coat. Everyone in the room tensed. He produced with exaggerated slowness a small object and held it up. "I do not want trouble. I want safe passage out of Montana Territory, and I want it guaranteed in writing. In exchange for this." It was a bottle. Small dark glass sealed with wax. The kind of bottle a decanter stopper might fit. It was perhaps a quarter full of something dark dried to a residue along the bottom. Nora went still the way a person goes still when they recognize something they were not certain they would ever see again. Then she stood. "Where did you get that?" she said. It was not a question. Her voice had dropped to something very quiet and very controlled. "Found it behind the kitchen of the governor's residence," Felix Grubb said. 3 days after the dinner. Somebody had thrown it in the rubbish, only it had rolled under a shelf and not made it into the bin. I picked it up because I thought I could sell it." He shrugged the shrug of a man for whom everything is a transaction. "Turns out I was right, only not the way I expected." Nora took one step toward him and stopped. She was looking at the bottle the way a doctor looks at a symptom they have been trying to locate. "That is the decanting bottle," she said. "From that evening. I recognize the label. My father kept that wine specifically for formal occasions." She looked at August. "The residue at the bottom. If that is what I think it is, if a physician examines it and confirms what Agnes saw Harlan add to it." "It is corroboration," August said. He was already standing. "It is more than corroboration," Nora said. "It is proof." August looked at Felix Grubb. "You will sign a statement, sworn, describing where you found it when and the condition it was in." Felix Grubb looked pained. "About the safe passage. You will have it, August said. Signed by me, which means it is legal and binding in this territory. But you sign first. Felix Grubb calculated rapidly. Then he nodded. August turned to Dolan Marsh. And you? I will testify to everything I know, Dolan Marsh said. I kept records, 4 years of records. I kept them because I understood that the day might come when I needed to account for what I had done. That day is today. August looked at me. I looked at the pine box on his desk with the contract inside it. And you have this, he said. And I have this, I agreed. August Fenn stood very still for a moment in the center of his small office, a man taking the measure of something before committing to it. I had seen him do this before years ago when we were young and the stakes were considerably lower. He had always been the kind of person who needed to look all the way around a thing before he stepped into it. It was what made him good at his work. He looked at Nora. I need you to understand that I cannot simply dismiss the warrant, he said. What I can do is send an urgent communication to Circuit Judge Harker, who has jurisdiction over both the original charges and a counterclaim of this nature. I can ask him to come to Millstone for an emergency hearing. In the meantime, I will hold you in protective custody, which means you are here in this building legally detained but not transported. That keeps you out of Harlan Voss's reach while we wait for the judge. How long? Nora asked. 2 days, perhaps 3. Harker moves when there is sufficient reason. He looked at the bottle in Felix Grubb's hand and at the pine box on his desk. I believe this constitutes sufficient reason. Nora was quiet for a moment. And Agnes? When she arrives tomorrow, her statement will be taken formally witnessed and included in the package I send to Harker. He paused. I want you to know that her account will be treated with the same weight as any other witness. That is not the universal practice in this territory, and I cannot speak to what will happen in other rooms, but in this office it is the practice. Nora looked at him for a long moment. Agnes has been waiting a long time for someone to say that, she said. I know, August said. It should not have taken this long. That is a different conversation for a different day. For now, it is simply what is true. He moved to his desk and began drafting the communication to the circuit judge. I moved to the window. The main street of Millstone was quiet in the late afternoon, the low winter sun laying long shadows across the frozen dirt. A man was crossing toward the feed store with a load on his back. 2 women stood in conversation outside the general store, their breath making small clouds in the cold air. Ordinary, all of it. And somewhere south of here, probably already aware that something had shifted, Harlan Voss was going about his ordinary afternoon in his ordinary way, the way powerful men do when they believe the architecture they have built around themselves is still intact. I heard Nora come to stand beside me at the window. I did not turn. It is not finished, she said quietly. No, I agreed, but it is different than it was. She was quiet for a moment. Then, thank you, for the mountain, for all of it. I looked at the street. Clara would have done the same, I said. Nora did not respond immediately. I felt her look at me and then look away out the window. No, she said after a moment. I think you would have done it regardless. I think Clara is the reason you know it was the right thing, but the doing of it was yours. I did not answer that. The sun went down behind the western peaks, and the cold intensified, and August Fenn wrote his urgent letter to Circuit Judge Harker by lamplight, and the town of Millstone went on around us, quiet and unremarkable, holding what had been placed inside it. Agnes Dover would arrive tomorrow. Harlan Voss did not yet know where we were. For one night that was enough. Agnes Dover arrived at first light. I heard her before I saw her. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps on the frozen boardwalk outside the deputy's office, the kind of steps that belonged to someone who had been walking for a very long time and had made a decision somewhere along the way to stop counting the miles and simply keep moving until they stopped needing to. I was awake. I had slept 3 hours on the floor near the stove in the back room of August's office, which was more than I had expected to manage. Nora had slept in the chair at August's desk, her head resting on her folded arms, and she woke at the sound of the steps at the same moment I did. lifting her head with the instant alertness of someone whose sleep had been light and watchful. August opened the door before Agnes reached it. She was 58 years old, and she had walked 40 miles in 4 days through Montana Territory, winter in shoes that had not been made for that purpose. She stood in the doorway with her back straight and her chin level, and she looked at the room, at August, at me, and finally at Nora. And what crossed her face then was not relief or emotion in any simple form. It was the expression of a person who has carried something heavy for a very long time and has finally arrived at the place where they can set it down. Nora crossed the room and took both of Agnes's hands in hers and did not say anything. Agnes looked at her for a moment and then nodded once, a small, complete gesture that contained everything that needed to be said between them. I moved to give Agnes the chair near the stove. She sat. She accepted the coffee August poured without comment and held the cup in both hands and let the warmth work its way in. She looked around the room at Dolan Marsh, sitting in the corner, at Felix Grubb's signed statement on August's desk, at the pine box, at the small dark bottle. Her eyes stopped on the bottle. "You found it," she said. "Felix Grubb found it," Nora said. 3 days after the dinner. It had rolled under a shelf in the kitchen. Agnes looked at Felix Grubb with an expression that was not gratitude and not its opposite, but something more complicated, the look of a person who has learned not to be surprised by where useful things come from. "I need to tell you what I saw," Agnes said to August. "All of it. From the beginning." "When you are ready," August said. He had his ledger open and his pen in hand. "I am ready now," Agnes said. "I have been ready for 11 days. It is the world that has not been ready." She set down the coffee cup and folded her hands in her lap and looked at August directly. "I was in the dining room at 7 in the evening, standing near the service door. My position at formal dinners was always near that door, so that I could respond to needs from the kitchen without crossing the main floor unnecessarily. I had been in that position at every formal dinner in the governor's residence for 19 years. August wrote. Agnes spoke. She did not hurry, and she did not embellish. She described the evening in precise sequential order: the arrival of the guests, the seating, the first course, the wine service. She described the moment when Harlan Voss had risen from his seat with the specific decanter he had brought, himself a bottle of red wine from his own cellar, and carried it to the sideboard near the head of the table. "He had his back to the room," Agnes said, "but not to me. I was at the service door, which was at an angle to the sideboard. I could see what his hands were doing." "And what were his hands doing?" August said. He removed a small glass vial from his inside coat pocket. He uncorked it. He tilted it into the decanter and swirled the decanter gently to mix it. Then he put the vial back into his pocket and turned around and handed the decanter to Mrs. Voss and asked her to pour for her father. The room was quiet. "You are certain of what you saw," August said. "I am as certain of it as I am of anything I have seen in 58 years of living," Agnes said. "I have seen it every night when I close my eyes since the evening it happened." "Why did you not say this at the time?" Agnes looked at him. The look was not angry. It was patient in the way that a very old truth is patient, the truth that has been waiting so long for someone to ask the right question that it has learned to wait without bitterness. "Because I am a black woman in Montana Territory in 1874, she said. "Because the men with legal authority in that room that night were the same men who attended Harlan Voss's business dinners and hunted on his land and owed him favors of one kind or another. Because when I stepped forward in the first hours after the governor fell, the man who took my statement was a deputy who worked for the county sheriff, who worked for the territorial authority, which had 3 members who had financial arrangements with Harlan Voss's mining operations." She paused. "I am not saying these things in anger. I am saying them because they are the facts of the situation as it existed, and you asked me why, and that is why." August put down his pen. He looked at Agnes for a long moment. "What you are describing is a failure of the system that should have protected you and the governor both," he said. "I cannot undo that. What I can do is ensure that in this proceeding your account is treated with the same legal weight as any other witness's account. I am going to write that explicitly into the record, and when Circuit Judge Harker arrives, I am going to say it to him directly." Agnes looked at him. "That is more than I expected," she said. "Less than what should have been available from the beginning, but more than I expected today." "It should have been available from the beginning," August said. "I am sorry it was not." Agnes picked up her coffee cup again. She drank. She looked at the bottle on August's desk. "That vial he used," she said, "the residue it left would have been arsenic trioxide. I know because I have seen it used before in small doses as a treatment for certain conditions. The color and the smell both characteristic. What is in that bottle is consistent with what I saw him add." August looked at Nora. "You have medical training," he said. "2 years at the Philadelphia College of Medicine," she said. "I can identify arsenic trioxide residue by visual examination and by reaction to certain compounds that any pharmacy can provide. If Dr. Mercer in Millstone has a basic dispensary, I can confirm it this morning." "He does," August said. "I will take you there myself." He stood. He looked at the room, at Agnes at Dolan Marsh, at Felix Grubb's signed statement on the desk at the pine box with the contract at the bottle. "I am sending for Judge Harker this morning," he said. "In the meantime, no one leaves Millstone without speaking to me first." He looked at Dolan Marsh when he said this. "I have nowhere to go," Dolan Marsh said, "and nothing to run from that I have not already been running from for 4 years." August put on his coat. They had been gone perhaps 20 minutes. August and Nora when I heard the horses. Not 1 or 2. Many. The sound of organized movement, multiple animals coming in from the south road at a controlled pace, the pace of people who are not hurrying because they do not believe they need to. I went to the window. Harlan Voss rode at the front. He was not what I had imagined over 5 years of thinking about him. He was smaller than the version in my head, narrower through the chest, with a face that was unremarkable in the way that faces are sometimes unremarkable when the person wearing them has long since concluded that the impression they need to make does not depend on their appearance. He was 52 years old, and he rode with the easy authority of a man who has never had a serious reason to doubt that the world would arrange itself to accommodate him. Behind him rode Dolan Marsh's former colleagues, 6 men who carried themselves the way professional muscle carries itself economically, without display, conserving the thing until it is needed. And beside Harlan Voss to his right rode a man in a suit who carried a leather satchel across his saddle, which meant he was a lawyer, which meant Harlan had known this was coming and had prepared for it with the thoroughness that had kept him insulated for so long. I turned to the room. Agnes Dover was already on her feet. Not to run. She was standing straight, looking at the window with the expression of a woman who has been through enough that the arrival of more difficulty is simply the next thing to be dealt with. Dolan Marsh had not moved from his chair. He was looking at the window with an expression I could not fully read. Something between recognition and resolve, the look of a man who has arrived at a decision and is no longer uncertain about it. "Stay here," I said to Agnes, to Dolan. "You too." I went outside. Harlan Voss pulled his horse up in front of August's office and looked down at me. He took his time about it. He was a man who understood the language of small delays and what they communicated. "You are Cormac Fenn," he said. "Yes." "Thomas Fenn's son." "Yes." He looked at me with the careful attention of someone assessing a variable they had not previously accounted for. "Your father was a capable man," he said. "A difficult situation. What happened to his partnership arrangement? These things occur in the course of complex business dealings." "They occur," I said, "when someone arranges for them to occur." He smiled. It was not the smile of a man who finds something funny. It was the smile of a man who has had long practice at presenting pleasantness as a surface. "I have a legal order for the transfer of Nora Voss to the custody of the Territorial Marshal's office," he said, "signed by Judge Alderman of the 2nd District. I would like to speak with Deputy Fenn." "He is not here." "Then I will wait." He did not move to dismount. His men did not move. The lawyer with the satchel looked at the office building with the assessing eye of someone calculating how a space could be entered and controlled. I stood in front of the door. We looked at each other. This was the man who had taken the land, who had turned my father out into a winter that killed him by degrees, who had done the same to Clara, who had done it with paperwork and lawyers and the comfortable machinery of legal legitimacy so that no single act could be pointed to as the cause, only the accumulation of acts, the layered results. I had 5 years of feeling about this moment. I had imagined it many ways in the dark hours of the mountain winters when there was nothing to do but feed the fire and think. None of the versions I had imagined looked like this. My hand was not on my rifle. I had made that choice consciously when I came outside. Nora had made it for me on the night in August's office when she had looked at me from across the room and shaken her head, and I had honored that because she was right, not because Harlan Voss deserved the consideration of being dealt with through legitimate means, because Nora did not deserve to have her case destroyed by the story that would be told about what happened if I chose the alternative. "August Fenn will be back within the hour," I said. "You can wait or you can go. Either way, you will deal with him and not with me." Harlan Voss looked at me for another long moment. Then he looked at the office door. Something passed across his face. A small recalculation. The briefest acknowledgement that the situation was not entirely as he had expected it to be. He did not dismount. His men did not move. But he waited. August returned 40 minutes later with Nora beside him. He saw the situation from halfway down the main street, and his pace did not change, did not hurry, did not slow. He walked the same way to the end. He looked at the legal order Harlan's lawyer presented. He read it slowly and carefully. Then he looked at Harlan Voss. "This order was issued by Judge Alderman of the 2nd District," August said. "Correct," the lawyer said. "This matter falls under the jurisdiction of Circuit Judge Harker, who has authority over both the original warrant and the counterfiling I submitted this morning," August said. "Judge Alderman's order is valid in the 2nd District. We are in the 3rd District. I have a communication from Judge Harker's office confirming his jurisdiction and his intention to conduct an emergency hearing in Millstone within 48 hours. He produced the paper. He held it up. The lawyer looked at it. He looked at Harlan Voss. Harlan Voss looked at the paper, at August, at me. At the window of the office behind me where I knew he could not see Agnes Dover standing back from the glass, but where something in his calculation was telling him that the variables were not arranged the way he had expected. "My client has legitimate concerns about the security of. Your client is welcome to remain in Millstone until Judge Harker arrives," August said. "He is not welcome to remove any person from this town or from my custody prior to that hearing. If he attempts to do so, I will arrest him for obstruction of territorial judicial proceedings." Silence. The kind of silence that occurs when a man who has never heard no from a source he took seriously hears it for the first time from a source he cannot immediately dismiss. Harlan Voss looked at August Fenn for a long time. August Fenn looked back. August was not a large man, and he was not an intimidating one in any physical sense. But he had a quality I had noticed my whole life in him, the quality of a person who has decided what is right and has stopped being interested in arguments to the contrary. It was not stubbornness, it was something quieter and more durable. Harlan Voss turned his horse. "We will discuss this with Judge Harker," he said to the lawyer. They rode to the hotel at the other end of the street. August watched them go. Then he turned to me. "The bottle confirms it," he said quietly. "Mercer identified arsenic trioxide residue consistent with a lethal concentration. He will testify to that effect." I looked at Nora. She was standing very still beside August, her arms at her sides, her face composed. But her hands were not quite steady, and she did not try to hide that. "It is real," she said quietly, not to either of us in particular, to herself perhaps, to the long 11 days that had led here. "It is actually real." "It has always been real," I said. She looked at me. Her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with tears, or perhaps everything to do with the kind that come from something loosening that has been held too tight for too long. "Come inside," August said. "We have work to do before Harker arrives." We went inside. Chapter 6. The Green Gloves. Judge Harker arrived on the morning of the second day. He came alone, which surprised people who had expected the formal apparatus of a territorial hearing, the clerks and the bailiffs and the accumulated furniture of official proceedings. What came instead was a single man on a gray horse 60 years old, heavy-set with a white beard trimmed close in the unhurried manner of someone who has seen enough versions of human difficulty that new ones are sorted quickly into categories he already understands. He read the materials August had assembled for 2 hours before he said a word to anyone. August had been thorough. The partnership contract of 1868 with Thomas Fenn's signature. Felix Grubb's sworn statement about the bottle and where he found it. The medical finding from Dr. Mercer regarding the arsenic trioxide residue. Agnes Dover's written account of the evening signed and witnessed describing what she saw at the sideboard. Dolan Marsh's 4 years of records organized by date and subject covering the range of operations he had conducted at Harlan Voss's direction. And Nora's own statement, which she had written herself longhand in the careful and precise language of someone who had been trained to observe and report without embellishment. Judge Harker read all of it. Then he called Harlan Voss's lawyer into the office and gave him 90 minutes to review the materials and prepare a response. The lawyer came back in 90 minutes with a folder of his own and an expression that told me he had spent the 90 minutes understanding that the architecture of the case he had prepared was being built on a foundation that was no longer intact. The hearing took place in the church because it was the only space in Millstone large enough to hold the people who needed to be present without making the proceedings feel like they were being hidden. The church was full. Word had moved through Millstone the way it always moves through small towns quickly, and with the particular urgency that attaches itself to events that feel consequential. Farmers and shopkeepers and miners and their families filled the pews. They were quiet the way people are quiet when they understand they are watching something that matters. Agnes Dover sat in the front row. She had been given fresh clothes by the wife of the hotel owner, a woman named Mrs. Perry, who had taken one look at Agnes and decided without apparent deliberation that practical kindness was the appropriate response to the situation. Agnes sat with her back straight and her hands folded and her eyes on Judge Harker. Dolan Marsh sat 2 rows behind her. He had the look of a man who has made peace with a difficult decision and is now engaged in the less dramatic but more sustained work of living with its consequences. Felix Grubb sat at the far end of the last pew near the door, positioned in the way of a man who wants to be able to leave quickly if the calculations change. But he stayed. Harlan Voss sat at the front to the right with his lawyer beside him. He was still presenting the surface. The composed face, the correct posture, the air of a man who finds the entire proceeding somewhat beneath him while acknowledging its formal necessity. But his lawyer's folder was open on his knee, and the lawyer was turning pages with the energy of someone looking for something they need very badly and are not finding. August stood to the left of Judge Harker. Nora sat beside him. I stood at the back of the church against the wall because standing at the back of rooms where things were happening had been my habit for long enough that it felt like the right place. Judge Harker called Agnes Dover first. She walked to the front of the church and stood before him, and she told the truth. The same truth she had told in August's office, the same sequential, precise, unembellished account delivered in the same even voice. She did not look at Harlan Voss while she spoke. She looked at Judge Harker. When she finished, Harlan's lawyer rose. He questioned her for 20 minutes. He questioned her about her position in the room, the angle of her view, the lighting conditions at the sideboard, whether she had consumed alcohol that evening, whether she had reason to hold personal animosity toward Harlan Voss, whether she had discussed her account with Nora Voss prior to giving it. He was skilled and he was thorough, and he found no opening because there was none. Agnes Dover answered every question with the same patient precision she had brought to her account. She did not become flustered. She did not become angry. She did not qualify what she had seen. She had seen what she had seen, and she knew what she knew, and the cross-examination did not change any of that. When the lawyer finished, Judge Harker looked at Agnes for a long moment. "Thank you," he said. "Your account has been entered into the record." Agnes walked back to her seat. Mrs. Perry, sitting beside her, put a hand briefly on her arm. Dolan Marsh came next. He opened his record book and read from it directly, date by date, order by order. The legal falsification of the Stone Creek Partnership documents in 1869. The removal of Thomas Fenn's name from the operating records. The arrangements made to ensure that the county clerk who administered the transfer moved to California. The preparation and execution of the plan for the governor's dinner. The instructions he had received in a room in Harlan Voss's house, sitting across a desk, from a man who spoke of ending a life with the same inflection he used to discuss the movement of cattle or the timing of a shipment. Harlan Voss sat through all of it without moving. His lawyer objected where he could. Judge Harker overruled where the record was clear. The lawyer's objections became less frequent as the reading continued until they stopped entirely in the last third of the book, where Dolan's records were most specific and most detailed. Dr. Mercer presented the physical findings regarding the bottle. He was a careful man and a credible one, and he spoke in the language of medical evidence without reaching beyond what the evidence supported. When it was Nora's turn, she stood and she spoke, and she did not hide anything. She described the dinner. She described Harlan handing her the decanter. She described pouring the glass and handing it to her father, and the 2 minutes that followed. She described her realization in the days after that what had seemed like a coincidence of opportunity was not a coincidence at all. She described 11 days of running of cold of the moment she woke on a stranger's back, on a mountain she did not recognize, and understood she was not dead. She did not look at me when she said that, but I felt it. When she finished, Harlan's lawyer asked to address the judge. He was a good lawyer. In the absence of what had been presented today, he would have been a very effective one. He argued procedural concerns about the admission of Dolan Marsh's records, questioned the chain of custody for the bottle, noted that Agnes Dover's account, while emotionally compelling, was singular and unverified by any second independent witness. Judge Harker listened to all of it. Then he asked Harlan Voss if he wished to speak. Harlan Voss stood. He straightened his coat. He looked at the room with the expression he had worn for the duration of the proceedings, composed slightly above the material, the expression of a man who has always found a way and expects to find one now. He spoke for 12 minutes. He was articulate and measured, and he constructed in real time a version of events that accounted for each piece of evidence by explaining it as misunderstanding, misidentification, or motivated fabrication by people who had reason to damage him. He spoke about his grief over the governor's death, his concern for his wife's mental state, his attempts to find her and ensure her safety. He spoke about the partnership dispute as a regrettable business matter that had been resolved through proper legal channels. He was very good. But the record book was open on the table. The bottle was on the table. The contract with Thomas Fenn's signature was on the table. Agnes Dover was sitting in the front row with her back straight and her hands folded and her eyes clear. When Harlan Voss finished, Judge Harker looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and opened the large ledger he had brought with him, and he wrote for several minutes in silence. When he looked up, the room was very still. "I am issuing the following findings," he said. 1. The warrant for the arrest of Nora Voss, formerly Nora Callum, is hereby suspended pending a full retrial of the original charges in a court of proper jurisdiction on the grounds that material evidence exists which was not available to the original proceeding and which substantially alters the evidentiary picture. He continued writing as he spoke. 2. I am ordering the detention of Harlan Voss pending investigation of charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, falsification of legal documents in the matter of the Stone Creek Partnership of 1868, and obstruction of territorial justice. He will be held in the custody of Deputy August Fenn until transport to Helena can be arranged. He set down the pen. In the matter of the witness Agnes Dover, her account has been entered into the permanent territorial record as a first-order witness statement. Let the record reflect that this court found her testimony credible, consistent, and given under circumstances that demonstrate considerable personal courage. Agnes did not look away from Judge Harker. But Mrs. Perry put her hand on Agnes's arm again, and this time it stayed there. Harlan Voss's lawyer was on his feet with objections that Judge Harker addressed one by one with the patience of a man who has held this position long enough to find repetition tiresome but not unexpected. Harlan Voss himself did not speak. He stood when his lawyer stood and sat when his lawyer sat, and when August Fenn crossed the room to stand beside him with the handcuffs, he extended his wrists with the precise, contained control of a man who is not yet finished and knows it and is conserving himself accordingly. He did not look at Nora. He looked at Dolan Marsh. It was a brief look, a few seconds. Dolan Marsh met it without flinching. Something passed between them that I could not read from where I stood, something that belonged to 4 years of shared history that the rest of us had not been part of. And then Harlan Voss looked away. August led him out. The church began to empty slowly, the way churches empty after significant events, with the particular quietness of people who are processing what they have witnessed and are not ready to return fully to the ordinary business of the afternoon. I stayed at the back of the wall. Nora was the last person left in the front of the church, standing near the table where the evidence had been arranged. She was looking at the bottle, at the contract, at the pages of Dolan Marsh's record book still lying open. She stood there for a long time. I did not go to her. I waited. When she turned and walked back up the aisle toward the door, she stopped when she reached me. She did not say anything for a moment. She looked at me with the same directness she had used since the first night in the cabin. The quality I had come to understand was not performance, but simply the way she inhabited herself. "It is not over," she said. "The full trial will take months. Harlan has money, and he has lawyers, and he will use both. I know. He may find a way to reduce the charges. He may find a judge who is more accommodating." She paused. "I am not naive about the limits of what happened today. Today was enough," I said. "Today was what needed to happen today." She looked at me. "Yes," she said. "It was." We walked out of the church together into the afternoon. The cold was the same cold it had always been, indifferent and absolute. The main street of Millstone was quiet in the particular way of a town that is digesting something. A few people nodded to us as we passed. Mrs. Perry stood outside the hotel with Agnes and lifted a hand in our direction. We went to August's office. August was behind his desk writing up the formal detention paperwork. Dolan Marsh sat in the corner with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who has completed something and is now in the unfamiliar territory of having nothing urgent left to do. He looked at the pine box on August's desk, then at me. "If there is work to be done on that land," he said, "when the time comes, I am not without skills in that regard." He did not say it as an offer requiring an answer. He said it the way a man states a fact he needs to put somewhere outside himself. Felix Grubb was gone. August had signed the safe passage letter before the hearing. Felix had taken it and his coat and the particular energy of a man who never stays anywhere longer than necessary, and had departed in the direction of the livery while the hearing was still underway. I did not miss him. August looked up when we came in. "Judge Harker wants to speak with you both tomorrow morning," he said to Nora. "Formal statement for the official filing. Routine?" Nora nodded. "The matter of the Stone Creek contract," August said. He looked at me. "Harker reviewed it. He says the falsification is clear and documentable given Dolan's records as corroboration. He will include a referral in his filing for a land title review proceeding. That is a separate process, slower, but it starts here." I looked at the pine box on his desk. "How long?" I said. "A year, perhaps. Maybe less if the evidence is as clean as it looks. The land would be returned to the Fenn estate, which means to you." I was quiet for a moment. Stone Creek. The valley. The sugar maple and the oak along the south ridge, the spring that came up through the limestone on the eastern side and never froze even in the worst of winter. Clara walking the fence line in the early morning with her green gloves because her hands felt the cold before the rest of her did. "All right," I said. That evening the four of us, August, Agnes, Nora, and I, ate together at the table in the back room of the office. Agnes had taken over the cooking with the authority of someone who does not require an invitation to make herself useful, and she had produced from the stores in August's small pantry a meal that was considerably better than anything the pantry seemed to warrant. We ate and we talked, not about Harlan Voss, not about the hearing or the trial or the proceedings ahead, but about other things. August told a story from his early days as a deputy that was embarrassing enough to be funny. Agnes talked about her sister in Harker's Crossing. Nora asked questions and listened to the answers with the attention of someone who has spent enough time running that the ordinary luxury of conversation has become remarkable. I said less than the others, which was not unusual, but I was not absent from it. I was there in the room in a way I had not been in a room with other people for a long time. At some point, Agnes and August drifted into a conversation about the practicalities of the next few weeks, what Agnes would do, where she would stay, whether August's offer of a position in Millstone was something she wanted to consider. Nora stood and put her coat on and went outside. I waited a few minutes, then I followed. She was standing on the boardwalk in front of the office, looking up the main street at the darkened storefronts and the sky above them, which had gone from black to deep blue to the particular clear dark of a cold Montana night, the stars sharp and close, the way they only get at altitude in deep winter. I stood beside her. We were quiet for a while. "What will you do?" I said. "There is a town called Millstone," she said, "that does not have a physician. Agnes tells me August has been trying to recruit one for 2 years. She paused. "I did not finish my degree, but I have 2 years of medical training and 19 months of whatever the mountains count for, and Dr. Mercer is 63 and has been looking for someone to work with him. You would stay here." "I would stay here," she said, "for a while, until the trial is resolved at minimum, and perhaps after." She was quiet for a moment. "And you," she said. I looked up the street. Beyond the end of the street was the dark shape of the mountains, the long ridge of the Bitterroot against the sky. "Stone Creek," I said. "Yes." "The valley is worth going back to," I said. "The land is worth rebuilding on." I paused. "Clara is worth honoring by doing something with it rather than leaving it to someone else to misuse." Nora did not say anything. She was looking at the mountains. "It will take time," I said. "The legal process, the rebuilding. It is not a thing that happens quickly." "No," she agreed. "Millstone is 40 miles from Stone Creek," I said. "If a person knew the Blackthorn Pass, it is a 2-day journey in winter, shorter in spring when the lower trail opens." She looked at me. "That is true," she said. "A physician in Millstone would need to know the mountain routes, in case of emergencies. People get hurt in the high country. They need someone who can reach them." "They do," she said. "I could show you the routes," I said. "In the spring, when the pass is passable without the risk." She was quiet for a moment. "I would need to know them," she said. "For the work." "Yes," I said, "for the work." We stood for another moment in silence. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. My hand found the green gloves the way it always did, by the particular texture of the soft leather, the specific small weight of them. I held them for a moment without taking them out. Then I took them out. I held them in my hand, and I looked at them in the dark, the color of them invisible in the absence of light, but the shape of them familiar in a way that went beyond sight. I thought about Clara. Not with the particular sharpness of grief, the kind that had been the primary texture of the last 3 years, but with something different. The way you think about a person who was entirely real and entirely loved, and who is not present in the way they used to be, but whose presence is not gone from the world, only redistributed, settled into the places they touched, and the things they taught, and the decisions you make that carry the weight of what they would have said. I thought about Clara telling me the hardest truths were the only ones worth saying. I thought about 2 years on a mountain that had not cured me of anything. I thought about a pine box on a shelf in a dark cabin, and the footprints in the snow, and a woman who had said the hardest thing first so I would know what I was walking into. I stepped back through the office door. Inside, beside the entrance, there was a small shelf that held lanterns and keys. I set the green gloves on it. I set them there carefully, the way you set something down that you are not throwing away, that you are placing where it belongs, so that it can be what it is and you can be what you need to be next. I stood there for a moment with my hand near them. Then I let my hand fall. I went back outside. I turned back. Nora was watching me. She had seen what I did, and she did not look away from it, and she did not say anything about it, and that was exactly right. It was not the kind of thing that needed commentary. It was not the kind of thing that needed witness, so much as it needed simply someone present who understood what it was. She understood what it was. "The spring roots," she said after a moment. "I will need to know all of them, not just the main ones." "There are 7 that matter," I said. "The others are variations." "Then 7," she said. "It will take time to learn them properly." "I have time," she said. "For the first time in 11 days I have time." We went back inside. August had poured coffee and was explaining something in the ledger to Agnes, who was listening with the expression of a woman who has agreed to learn something new and is applying herself to it fully. The lamp on the desk threw a warm circle of light across the table and the papers and the faces of the people sitting around it. I sat down. Nora sat across from me. The fire in the stove held steady. Outside, Millstone was quiet under its cold sky, and 40 miles east through the dark of the Bitterroot winter, the valley of Stone Creek lay under its snow, the spring that never froze, still running beneath the surface of the ice, still moving the way things that are alive keep moving even when everything above them has gone still. Spring was 4 months away. It had been 4 months before, and it had come. It would come again. I picked up the coffee cup August had set in front of me and held it in both hands the way a person holds something warm when the cold outside is serious. And I listened to Agnes tell August that his coffee was adequate, but his pantry organization was an affront to basic logic. And August say that he had been organizing that pantry for 6 years, and it worked perfectly well for him, and Agnes say that 6 years of a thing being wrong did not make it right. Nora caught my eye across the table. I did not quite smile, but something in my face did what smiling would have done. She looked back at her coffee. Outside the mountain stood where it had always stood. It did not care who was innocent or guilty, who was found or lost, who had come down from it changed, and who had come down the same as they went up. It simply stood the way mountains stand in the particular patience of things that measure time in ages rather than winters, but I had come down from it. And I was not the same as I went up. That was enough. That was for the first time in a long time more than enough. 6 months later, Stone Creek Valley Spring, 1875. The flower that Clara had loved, the small yellow ones that came up along the creek in April before anything else came up on schedule that year, exactly as they had every year the valley could remember. The foundation of the new house was laid in March, the walls framed in April, the roof finished by the first week of May. August helped on the weekends, riding out from Millstone with his tools in his saddlebag, working without complaint and without requiring conversation. Dolan Marsh, awaiting his testimony at the Helena trial, had asked August if there was anything useful he could do with his time. August had told him about the house. He had come and worked 3 weeks on the framing and left without being asked to stay and without asking for anything. The trial of Harlan Voss opened in Helena in June. Nora testified for 2 days. Agnes testified for a day and a half. Dolan Marsh testified for 3 days, and his record book was entered into evidence in its entirety. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The conviction was on all primary counts. Nora was in Millstone when the verdict came by telegraph. She was between patients. Dr. Mercer handed her the telegram, and she read it once and set it on the desk and finished seeing her patient before she allowed herself to stop and be still with it. Agnes Dover remained in Millstone. She managed the clinic on the days Nora rode to Stone Creek and kept the books with a precision that Dr. Mercer said was the most organized he had seen in 40 years of medical practice. August Fenn was promoted to sheriff of Millstone County the following autumn. He wrote to Cormac every month. Cormac wrote back every 2 months. The letters were short and factual, and they were always answered. On a Saturday in late May, Nora rode the lower trail from Millstone to Stone Creek for the first time without Cormac guiding her. She arrived in the early afternoon, tied her horse at the post Cormac had put in beside the new cabin, and walked down to the creek where the yellow flowers were still going a little past their peak, but still there, still the color Clara had loved. Cormac was working on the fence along the south field. He heard her coming down the slope and set down his tools and waited. She stopped beside him and looked at the creek and the flowers and the long line of the ridge above them, and then she looked at the new window on the east wall of the cabin, the one that would fill with light every morning when the sun came over the ridge. "I found it without the guide," she said. "I know," he said. "I could tell by the time you arrived. You came the right way." "The right way is the only way I know," she said. He looked at her. She looked at the creek. "Clara would have liked this," she said. "The way it is now." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "She would have." The creek ran over its stones, and the afternoon light moved across the valley the way it had always moved, slow and gold and indifferent to the particulars of what stood beneath it, caring only that things were alive and present and facing it. They were both those things. They stood there together for a while in the particular quiet of a place that has been returned to the people it belonged to, and the valley held them the way valleys hold things, without ceremony, without comment, simply as a matter of the ongoing order of the world. It was enough. It was everything.